Picture a bedroom. Not your bedroom. Not the room you're currently lying in, with your phone propped on the pillow and your carefully considered blanket and whatever ambient sound you've decided helps tonight. I mean a real bedroom. The realest bedroom that ever existed in the history of bedrooms. A medieval bedroom. Here's what you have. A room roughly the size of a large parking space. No windows, or rather one small hole in the wall stuffed with oiled cloth that admits neither light nor warmth with any great efficiency. The floor is packed earth, covered in a layer of old rushes and hay that were fresh sometime in the spring and have since absorbed every spilled drink, every muddy boot, every drip from a leaking roof, and at least one incident involving the dog that nobody wants to talk about. The smell is something you're going to need a moment to prepare for. Imagine the inside of a wet wool sock that has been left in a compost pile. Then add wood smoke, because the fire in the central hearth has been burning for 17 straight hours, and the smoke has nowhere to go except up through the thatch, which it does eventually, but slowly, pooling at breathing height first. Then add animals, not metaphorically, literally. There are 2 goats on the other side of a wooden partition that is absolutely not soundproof and arguably not smell-proof either. There is a pig. The pig is closer than you would prefer. Then add 6 human beings, all sleeping in one room, some sharing a bed, all of them wearing the same clothes they wore yesterday and the day before, because underwear in the modern sense doesn't exist yet, and laundry is an event that happens perhaps once a month if you're lucky, and the weather cooperates. That's your bedroom. And here's the thing that nobody tells you when they write about medieval life. The thing that historians only started piecing together in the 1990s, when a scholar named Roger E. Kirch spent years going through diaries, court records, religious texts and medical guides, and realized that everything we assume about sleep, the basic, fundamental thing, is wrong. Medieval people didn't sleep the way you sleep. They didn't lie down at 9, close their eyes, and stay unconscious for 8 hours until it's time to begin again. That's not how sleep worked for most of human history. That's not how it worked for anyone until gaslighting changed evening life in the 1800s, and electric lighting finished what gaslighting started. Medieval people slept in shifts, 2 sleeps, every night, without exception. First sleep from roughly dusk until midnight. Then they woke up for an hour, sometimes 2, and they were awake, present, thinking, doing things, real things, important things, sometimes frightening things, sometimes things they could only do in the middle of the night for reasons both practical and social. And then second sleep, from the middle of the night until dawn. The gap between the 2 sleeps had a name. In English they called it the watch, or the waking. In French, dorveil, a word that blends sleeping and wakefulness into something that doesn't translate cleanly. Doctors recommended it. Theologians scheduled prayers around it. Criminals preferred it. It was as ordinary as breakfast. You've probably never done it consciously. But I honestly don't know how this story's going to land for you tonight. Whether you'll drift off during the first sleep section and wake up at 3 in the morning, completely disoriented, wondering what happened, and then realize, lying there in that strange alert darkness, that your body has been trying to tell you something for years. I make these history stories, and sometimes I wonder if the sleep ones work the wrong way round. Whether you fall asleep to the history and the history gets into your dreams and you wake up at 2 a.m. knowing things about the architecture of 14th century English knights that you definitely didn't know before. Either way, subscribe if you want, find somewhere comfortable, put the phone down if you can. Here we go. Your name is Thomas Brewer, not a brewer's son. To be clear, the name attached itself to your family 2 generations back when your grandfather actually was a brewer for about 4 years before he lost the equipment in a debt and returned to farming. The name stuck. This is how surnames work in 1313. You inherit them before anyone's really decided they're permanent. You arrived at the village of Thornfield in October, 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks is long enough to know where the well is. It is not long enough to stop feeling in the evenings when the light goes out of the sky and the lane fills with dark, like something very far from home. Home is 3 days' walk northeast, a village called Stowe. The name will survive 7 centuries, though the village that bears it will eventually sell mostly fudge to tourists, and none of your blood will have lived there since a plague arrived that you don't know is coming, that none of you can know is coming. But that's not the night we're in. We're in October 1313, and you don't know about the plague, and you don't know about the tourists, and the most pressing thing in your world is the cold coming in under the door of the Atfield longhouse, where you sleep near the entrance because you're the newest person, and that's how it works. Edmund Atfield owns this house. He's 45, a yardlander, a man who holds roughly 30 acres from the lord of the manor in the scattered strip system of the open fields. By the standards of 1313, this makes him moderately prosperous. Not wealthy, not noble, not anyone who'll appear in a chronicle, but solid. The kind of solid that means expecting enough to eat most years, barring disaster. His wife is Maud. Maud is 40 and runs the household with a precision that would impress a military commander. She communicates most of her opinions about the quality of your work through expressions, a raised eyebrow that means you almost got that right, a particular set to her lips that means we'll be discussing this later. You've learned to read both. Their son William is 22 and knows he's the senior apprentice in the domestic hierarchy. Their daughter Agnes is 16 and largely ignores you, which is probably for the best. Young Ned is 8 years old and has an 8-year-old's complete lack of social filter, which means he regularly says aloud what everyone is thinking, usually at precisely the wrong moment. And grandmother Joan. Old Joan, somewhere in her 60s, which in 1313 makes her an elder in the full mythological sense of the word. She was born before the turn of the century. She has lived through 2 famines and a cattle plague and the deaths of 4 of her own children. She's seen things shaped and reshaped that everyone younger assumes are permanent. She doesn't volunteer information unless asked, and when she does speak, the room goes quiet. You sleep in the hall, all of you, together. There is a proper bed, wooden frame, straw mattress, wool blanket, and Edmund and Maud sleep in it. William sleeps on a pallet near the fire. Agnes and Ned share a second pallet at the far end of the room. Joan has a corner near the wall, with enough rushes piled under her that she's reasonably insulated. You have a pallet near the door. Near the door is not the warmest location. This will become relevant in the next hour. Before we get to the sleeping, we need to talk about the house, because the house is the reason everything works the way it does at night. It's a longhouse. Exactly what it sounds like. Long, narrow, built end to end, about 40 feet long and 16 feet wide, constructed from timber posts with walls of wattle and daub, woven sticks plastered with a mixture of clay, mud, animal hair and dung. This sounds terrible. It holds heat reasonably well, which is the point. The roof is thatch. Deep, layered thatch, maybe 3 feet thick at the ridge. The thatch is also home to an entire ecosystem of sparrows, mice and insects, all of which occasionally fall through into the room below. You've learned to cover food when you're not actively eating it. The floor is packed earth. The central shallow channel running toward the door exists for drainage. In dry weather, it's just a slight depression. After rain, when mud is tracked in from the lane, it becomes briefly optimistic. No windows, no glass. A door at each end, one facing the lane for people, one facing the kitchen croft for everything else, and the animals. The lower third of the longhouse is separated from the human living space by a timber partition about shoulder height. On the other side, Edmund's 2 oxen, 3 goats, 1 pig, 12 chickens. Come the worst of winter, the sheep will join them. The horse stays in a separate small structure outside. Maud drew a line about the horse. Some negotiations you win. The animals are not here, because Edmund lacks space for a separate barn. He has space. They're here because their body heat matters. On a January night, the combined warmth of 6 large animals raises the temperature of the longhouse by a measurable amount. In a building with no glass, no insulation beyond 3 inches of wattle and daub, every degree of warmth is not a comfort but a calculation. This is medieval climate control. The fire is in the centre of the human half of the room, on a raised hearthstone. No chimney. A hole in the thatch above, covered with a pottery louvre that can be adjusted for airflow. The smoke goes up through this hole, mostly. When the wind comes from the east, the smoke does what it wants. The fire burns from morning until the household sleeps. Then it is banked, covered in ash to keep the embers alive, and rebuilt at dawn. Banking the fire at night and rebuilding it at dawn. That's your job, in addition to the fields. Maud did not explicitly tell you this. You simply observed that it kept needing to be done, and that the expression she produced when it wasn't done was sufficient explanation. It's Thursday evening, mid-October, 1313. The sun went down about an hour ago. Not slowly, not gold. A medieval October sunset is the sky removing available light as efficiently as possible. By 4 in the afternoon, the colour drains from the clouds. By 5, the lane is dark. By 5:30, you cannot see your hand in front of your face unless you're standing near a fire. Candles cost money. Tallow dips. The poor person's candle, made from animal fat wound around a rush, cost less, but smoke badly and smell worse. A household like Edmund's might burn 2 in an evening, not more. When the fire is banked and the dips are out, the darkness in the longhouse is complete. Not dim, not shadowy. Complete. You've been working since before dawn. 11 hours clearing the last of the autumn roots from the headland strips, before the ground froze solid. Your hands are raw from the cold and the dirt, skin cracked at the knuckles where it dried too fast after getting wet. Your back has developed an opinion about the angle you spent 4 hours bent at, and it is not a favourable opinion. Your feet, inside shoes that were adequate in September, are numb at the toes and aching at the heels. Supper was an hour ago. Pottage. The eternal medieval meal, a thick stew of whatever the kitchen croft produced, which this year was mostly turnips, leeks, and dried beans with a ham bone that Maud has been using for flavour for 10 days, with bread. The bread is dark and heavy and has the consistency of something that intends to stay with you. That's the point. You ate it standing, near the fire, because the trestle table has been dismantled since harvest finished and nobody has reassembled it. You ate quickly, because everyone did, because the warmth of the fire was welcome, but the tiredness in your muscles was heavier. Now the fire is banked. The single tallow dip snuffed. Maud's voice through the dark. Ned. Bed. The shuffle of 8-year-old feet reluctant across the rushes. Edmund saying something low to William about tomorrow, about which strip to start on, about the drainage ditch at the south end of the long field. Then quiet. Well, not quiet. The goats. The goats produce a sound like someone with a mild but persistent complaint, a low bleat every few minutes, sometimes traceable to a cause and sometimes not. The pig shifts and breathes and occasionally makes a sound that can only be described as satisfied in a profoundly unsettling way. The thatch above is alive with mice running their midnight routes through the straw. You stopped being startled by it 2 weeks in. The winter night comes from the northwest, and when it comes from the northwest it finds a gap in the wattle at the south wall, and produces a thin, steady whistle. Not loud, just present. Just enough to be aware of. Edmund's breathing has already taken on the depth of sleep. Maud is quieter. She always is. But her breathing has changed too. The cold air comes in under the gap at the door. Someone stuffed rags in the gap once, and the rags are doing their best. But October has opinions that rags can only partially address. You're on your pallet. The wool blanket, thick, scratchy, smelling of lanolin that was never fully washed out, is pulled to your chin. Your feet are tucked against each other for warmth. The rushes under the pallet crinkle when you shift. You close your eyes. This part at least is easy. After 11 hours in the field, your body requires no convincing. The darkness comes fast, and it's a good darkness. Heavy and warm and absolute. This is first sleep. First sleep is different from the sleep you know. Researchers who've studied populations with no exposure to electric light describe it as deeper and more restorative than the second sleep that follows. The brain goes in quickly, reaches the deep stages fast. The kind of sleep where you don't remember dreaming, where you're not just unconscious but fundamentally, biochemically elsewhere. You've been doing this your whole life. Everyone has. You don't have a name for the waking that comes after it because you don't need one. It's simply what night is. The darkness takes you. Something wakes you. Not a specific sound, just the ordinary fact of your body deciding it has extracted what it needed from the first part of the night, and that it is, quite simply, awake. Your eyes open to complete darkness. No reference points, no visible ceiling, no glow from anywhere. For a long moment, 4 seconds, 5, your brain does the thing it does every night, the thing you've learned to expect but that still arrives fresh each time. You don't know where you are. Then the goat makes its noise, and you're back. Thomas Brewer, pallet near the door, the longhouse of Edmund Atfield, Yardlander, village of Thornfield, England, October 1313. You lie still for a moment. This is the watch. This is the waking between the sleeps. Around you, the breathing patterns of the household have shifted. Edmund's deep, sonorous sleeping breath is gone, replaced by something quieter, more present. Somewhere across the room, you can hear William turning on his pallet. A small sound from the direction of Agnes and Ned. A murmur, or just an exhale. You are not the only one awake. This is the thing that takes getting used to when you're new to it from outside. You expect the midnight hour to belong to you alone, your strange personal wakefulness in a house that has properly gone to sleep. But everyone wakes, not simultaneously, not to the minute, but within roughly the same hour every night. The whole household moved from first sleep to the watch. Different people use the time differently. Some pray. This is actually prescribed. The divine office, the cycle of canonical prayers structuring religious life, includes an office called matins, sometimes vigils, designed for midnight. Monks follow this exactly. They rise, file into the chapel in the dark, say the prayers, return to their cells, sleep second sleep. For a peasant household, the practice is less formal, but the instinct is the same. Something in the body knows. You sit up. Your back registers the cold air hitting the part that was against the warm palate. You ignore it. The first thing you do is what you do every night during the watch. You check the fire. Not because Maud told you to. Not because it's written down anywhere as your responsibility. Because it is October, and the fire is the only thing standing between this household and a very serious problem. And because you sleep nearest to it in the hierarchy of pallets, and because the responsibility settled on you the way responsibilities do when they're simply obvious and someone has to carry them, you move toward the hearth in complete darkness. You know the room by feel now. 3 paces from the pallet edge, slight left turn, avoid the dip near the drainage channel, 2 more paces, crouch. The hearthstone is warm against your palms. You reach into the ash. Carefully, the gesture of someone who has learned the precise amount of force that uncovers a coal without scattering it. And find the ember, the size of your fist radiating heat that reaches your palm from an inch away. Still alive. Still good. You stay crouched longer than necessary. Hands near the warmth, the glow barely visible through the grey ash cover, just enough to make out the dim shapes, the outline of the sleeping bench where Edmund and Maud lie quietly awake, the partition behind which the animals shift and breathe. We need to spend real time on fire. I know we touched on it. I want you to actually understand what fire means to this household, in a way that the word dangerous doesn't fully convey. This house is made of wood, straw, and dried mud. The roof is thousands of square feet of dry grass. Everything the family owns is inside it. Tools, food for the winter, wool, spare clothing, the animals. If this house burns down in October, they go into winter with nothing. Not a metaphor. Nothing. The nearest kin who might shelter them is days' walk away. The village will help. Medieval communities respond to individual disasters. They're actually quite good at it. But the village's help has hard limits, and those limits are defined by the fact that every household in the village is also trying to survive winter. If this house burns in October of 1313, people might die. This is why you check the fire. But here's the thing. Fire management at night isn't just about the one fire you can see. It's about all the fires you can't see. Your neighbours' houses are made of the same materials, and they are close. The houses in Thornfield are not separated by gardens. They're packed along the lane, close enough that the eaves of one nearly touch the eaves of the next. A fire that starts in the Benfield house, 2 doors up, reaches the Atfield house within minutes of becoming uncontrollable. The protocol is shout. Then the whole village wakes. Then everyone fills buckets from the well and forms a line and passes them. You've practiced this loosely. When a hayrick caught fire in September, every man in the village materialized from the dark within seconds of the shout going up. Because everyone was already awake, or nearly. Because the watch coincides with the hours when fire risk is highest, when the evening fire has been burning the longest, when embers are most likely to have shifted, when the household has been asleep and not watching. The hayrick was saved. 11 years ago, the village mill burned. Edmund was there. He describes the smell of burning grain, the molten wheat the mill had been holding, and there's something in the way he describes it that suggests a smell he will carry for the rest of his life. The embers tonight are fine. The stones are warm but not wrong. The ash cover is solid. You keep your hands there a moment longer than necessary anyway. Medical texts of the medieval period, not the cunning woman's knowledge, but the written texts that circulated in monasteries and eventually in universities, are remarkably specific about the watch. They call it the vigilantia intermissa, the interrupted wakefulness. They have opinions about it. The advice goes roughly like this. The period between first and second sleep is optimal for productive thought, for prayer, for marital relations, for mild exercise, and for digesting serious mental problems. The body has been rested and cleared by first sleep. The mind is still soft from the threshold state, more receptive, less defended than ordinary waking. This is not entirely wrong. Modern neuroscience recognizes the description. In first sleep, the brain consolidates the day's physical experience. In second sleep, which is richer in REM activity, it processes the emotional and creative content. The watch, in between, is a threshold state, present and reflective in a way that ordinary wakefulness cannot quite be. What does the Atfield household do with it? Sometimes they talk. Low voices, adult conversation in the dark, the kind that doesn't happen in daylight when there's always something pressing and always someone who might hear. The kind that happens when you can't see the person you're speaking to, and somehow that makes honesty easier. Edmund and Maud are talking now. You can hear them, not the words, just the rhythm, the low murmur of two people who have shared this hour for 20 years. The field rotation, maybe. Whether the rent payment at Michaelmas was fully settled. Whether Ned is eating enough. He was coughing last week, and Maud's attention to that cough has a focused quality that suggests it worries her more than she lets on. Whether the new farmhand, you, is going to work out. You don't hear this, just the murmur. But you know what conversations sound like in the dark, in the middle of the night. You grew up in a household too. Old Joan, in her corner, seems to spend the watch in a state that is either prayer or the prelucid edge of second sleep, and you're not sure she distinguishes between the two. She keeps a small wooden cross on a cord around her neck. In the morning sometimes you see that her fingers found it in the night and left it resting against her collarbone. Agnes, the daughter, recites during the watch. Not reading. She can't read. Almost nobody can. But lying very still with her lips moving. A prayer, probably, or a saint's life she memorized from hearing it at Mass, replayed in the dark. Agnes has the quality of someone who has known for a long time what she wants, and hasn't yet found the right way to say it to her father. The religious house in the town 5 miles east has been receiving informal inquiries. Ned, as far as you can tell, sleeps through the watch entirely. He is 8 years old, and his body has apparently decided that midnight waking is for other people. William, during the watch, goes outside. This was the thing that confused you most, your first week here. You woke, still disoriented, still not certain what the rules were, and you heard William's pallet shift, heard him pull on his coat, heard the croft door open and close. Gone. In the middle of the night. In October. You found out later. William goes to meet someone. A girl from the other end of the village, Emma Miller's daughter, whose name is Cecily, and who is, as best you can tell, fully aware of and actively participating in these midnight meetings, an architect of her own nighttime schedule rather than any kind of victim. The watch is the only time this is possible. Daylight means visibility. Evenings mean a shared room. Privacy is a luxury that doesn't exist at your social level. But in the watch, in the middle of the night, two people can find each other in a dark lane and have an hour that belongs entirely to themselves. Court records from this period contain references to people being found abroad at an unusual hour as a specific social category. Night courts in larger settlements dealt regularly with a cohort found somewhere they shouldn't be during the watch. Not all of them were criminals. Most of them were just trying to find 5 minutes that belonged only to them. Tonight you use the watch for something else. You are cold. The gap under the door is sending a thin river of October air across the floor, and there's a specific quality to this cold that isn't just temperature. It's the cold of not belonging, of being in a place that isn't yours yet, under a blanket that isn't the right smell, listening to the murmur of people having conversations you're not part of. You think about your mother's fire, not this fire, the Atfield hearth, a stranger's fire that you tend but that warms you the way borrowed warmth always warms, which is completely and without complaint but with the slight awareness that you didn't build it. Your mother's fire was against the north wall, not in the centre, a regional variation. It made the smoke more manageable but the heat directional. One side of the room always warm, one side always slightly cold, and the warm side was always your parents, and the cold side was always you and your brothers, and you knew this was fair because it was their house. But the cold was still cold, specific cold, personal cold, yours. The cold here near the Atfield door belongs to a different story. The thought isn't self-pity, not quite. You knew what you were coming to. A farm labourer in 1313 doesn't expect comfort. He expects work and food and shelter, and on all 3 counts Edmund Atfield has delivered. The work is hard but honest. The food is adequate. The shelter is above average for your situation. You're just not home. And home is 3 days' walk. And this is October, and winter is coming. And by the time spring makes travel reasonable again, 7 months will have passed. You'll be someone else by then. Let's talk about what the watch sounds like, because it's not what you might expect. You know, in a modern context, that night is quieter than day. You know this so completely you barely register it. Night means less traffic, fewer voices, the hum of the world dropping to something more manageable. In 1313 Thornfield, night is not quieter than day. It is differently noisy. The wind is in the thatch, a continuous low sigh that changes pitch as gusts come and go. The animals are restless in their portion of the house. The mice in the roof are active. These things you've learned to receive as background, as the texture of the night rather than intrusions into it. Outside, dogs. Medieval villages have dogs the way medieval villages have mud, ubiquitously, practically, without serious regulation of the number. The dogs sleep during the day and work at night, which is when the things they're meant to protect against are active. Tonight, somewhere 3 houses up the lane, a dog is barking at something. Another dog farther away answers. The first dog barks again. This could be a fox, a badger, a stray dog from another village, someone moving through the lane without business there, the miller's son going somewhere ill-advised. Absolutely nothing. Dogs in 1313 are not discriminating about what prompts a response. You listen to it track up the lane, move past the church, fade. An owl somewhere in the elm trees that line the south field. A tawny owl doing its night work. That hollow call that your grandmother would have read as an omen and that you're trying to simply receive as a bird. And under all of it, almost below the threshold of hearing, the brook. There's a stream at the bottom of the Westfield, maybe 400 paces from the house. In summer you can't hear it. Too much else. But tonight, in October, with the autumn rains filling it, you can make out the low sound of running water through the wattle walls. Running water at night is the sound of things that might go wrong, mills failing, bridges flooding, the low fields filling. You've heard enough stories about what October floods can do to a harvest not fully secured to feel a quiet vigilance when the brook is loud. It's not flooding tonight. The sound is steady, not rising, but you note it, the way you've learned to note it, because noting it is part of what you're here for. You're not sure what makes you turn toward Joan's corner, a change in her breathing maybe, the absence of a sound that was there before. You say quietly, "Joan," a pause, "Boy." Her voice is dry and low, not sleepy. That particular quality of alertness that very old people have in the middle of the night, when their bodies no longer bother with the deep certainties of youth, and instead occupy a continuous middle state that is neither fully asleep nor quite awake. Are you warm enough? A sound that means adequately. Or possibly, this question is less interesting than other questions. Silence. Then she says, unprompted, "When I was a girl." You wait. "We slept all in one room, 7 of us. My mother and father and my 3 brothers and my father's mother, who was older than I am now." A pause. "We had a cat. The cat slept on whoever it wanted." You don't speak. You've learned that interrupting Joan is how you stop Joan. "In the watch," she says, "my father used to tell stories. Not always, but sometimes. When he woke and the children were awake, stories he'd heard, things from the old king's time." A shift in the rushes. Not history stories, not the kind with dates and bishops, just stories. A man did something, a woman made a choice, something happened, and because it happened, something else happened. Small things, things that fit in the dark. You don't say anything. "You should learn some," she says, "for when you have children." You're 19. The idea of children is as theoretical as the idea of owning land, but you say, "Yes." Your voice is quiet enough, she says. Some people's voices are too loud for the night. This is from Joan, the highest available compliment regarding your character. You receive it carefully and thank her quietly, and within a few minutes her breathing has changed again, deeper, slower, and she is back in whatever portion of sleep she occupies. You sit with the hearthstone's warmth on your hands and think about stories told in the dark, 3 generations back from this one. Here's something obvious that becomes unsettling when you think about its implications. In medieval England, being outside at night without a clear reason is technically suspicious. Not precisely illegal. The law is nuanced the way medieval law is nuanced on most things, which means less nuanced on paper and more nuanced in practice, depending heavily on who you are and who's watching. But night curfews exist. The word curfew comes from the French couvre-feu, cover the fire, and originally referred to the evening bell signalling when to bank your hearth. This became associated with a broader instruction to be indoors. In towns, curfew was enforced. The night watch patrolled after the bell and detained people found abroad without cause. A young man abroad in the lanes at midnight in 1313 has a limited list of acceptable explanations, responding to an emergency, on legitimate nighttime work, or up to something. William, if questioned, would say, "I heard a noise, I went to check the animals. This is unverifiable and extremely plausible. The animals do make noises. Everyone in the household would confirm they heard noises. William has clearly done this before and has the story so practiced it sits ready in his mouth. But the rules of night matter for more than just protecting midnight rendezvous. They matter because night is genuinely dangerous in ways that daylight isn't, and the community's response to that danger had been codified, informally over centuries. Night is when thieves work, when the village pig left out by accident can be taken without witnesses, when a man with a grievance might choose to act undercover, when the wolves, and in 1313, yes, there are still wolves in England, not many, but some in the Welder areas north and west, are moving. Night is when fire spreads before anyone can stop it. Night is when the person with a fever who seemed better at supper can decline to a crisis point before dawn. The watch isn't just a quirk of pre-industrial sleep patterns. It's a survival mechanism. The household that wakes in the middle of the night and listens to the world around it is the household that catches the first smell of smoke, that hears the animal get out, that notices the change in someone's breathing that means things have gotten worse. The watch is the night guard taking a shift. It just happens to be built into your biology. This is the night the crisis happens. Not this Thursday in October we've been following. 3 weeks later. First week of November. Cold settled in properly now. Frost coming at night. The ground hardening to iron. The animals have been moved fully inside. The smell of the longhouse has achieved a completeness that you've made a philosophical truce with. Winter is no longer approaching. It has arrived and unpacked. Ned has been coughing for a week, not the dry occasional cough of someone with dust in the throat. A different cough, wet, low, from the chest, the kind that Maud has been treating with honey dissolved in hot water and a poultice of dried herbs she keeps in a bundle above the partition, the kind that made her face do a thing, a specific thing that you've learned to watch for. Sunday night, the watch falls, and Ned doesn't wake. He's sleeping, which would be fine, except that Ned always wakes during the watch. You've learned this about him, despite his youth. He wakes, rolls over, sometimes mumbles, usually sleeps again within minutes, but he wakes. He is reliably, chronically, annoyingly awake at midnight. Tonight he doesn't wake. You notice this because you're awake and the household is in its watch, and there's a silence from Ned's palate that isn't right. Not peaceful silence, the kind you become aware of. Maud notices too. You can tell because her voice, murmuring low with Edmund, stops, a moment, then her feet on the floor. She crosses the room in the dark. You can track her by sound, the specific crinkle of the rushes under her step, the slight differential in the darkness as she moves between you and the dim hearthstone. She kneels by Ned's pallet. You can hear her hand on his forehead, the soft, particular sound of a palm on a child's face, and then an exhale. Not a word, just an exhale. And you know, Edmund is up. "How bad?" he says, very quietly. She doesn't answer directly. She says, "Get the fire up. That's you. That's always you." You're at the hearthstone before she finishes the sentence, hands in the ash, finding the embers, adding the laid wood kept ready beside the hearth for exactly this possibility. Within a few minutes the fire is alive, throwing amber light across the room. Ned's face in the firelight, flushed. Too much colour. Eyes closed with the too complete closedness of a sick child. The way a fever makes everything shut down with an intensity that isn't sleep. His breathing audible from where you're crouched. That chest sound, wet and thick. Maud is at the partition, in the section where she keeps her things. Not many things, specific things. The herb bundles, the small pottery vessels, the cloths, and the knowledge she carries from her own mother, passed down in exactly these midnight moments for as far back as anyone can trace. She knows what she's doing. You can see it in her hands. Edmund sits beside Ned and puts his hand on the boy's shoulder, not shaking him, just present. Father's presence, which is not practical the way Maud's is, practical, but is its own necessary thing. Agnes is awake, arms around her knees, watching with an expression working hard at calm. William isn't here. He'll be back. He never stays past the second watch. Joan, in her corner, awake, still, her hand on the cross. You've seen this before, in your own house growing up. A sister with a fever for 3 days in January who recovered. A neighbour's boy who didn't. The mathematics of childhood illness in 1313 are not statistics you want to dwell on if you're trying to feel optimistic about the period. What the medicine is, Maud has dried lungwort, which they believed, for reasons partly wrong and partly not entirely wrong, helped the chest. She has garlic, which she chops now and mixes into a paste for a cloth to lay on Ned's chest. She has horehound, simmering now in a small pot over the fire with honey and hot water. What the medicine isn't, penicillin. What they don't have, the understanding of bacteria that will come 6 centuries from now. What they have instead is the watch. The watch means someone is awake. The watch means Maud noticed Ned's silence before the morning. Before the disease had another 5 or 6 hours to advance while everyone slept. She caught it at midnight, and now she has the night. Medieval medical literature, when it discusses home care of the sick, returns repeatedly to the idea of attendants, watching through the night. Not because watching cures anything directly, but because it's how you catch the changes, the fever rising, the breathing worsening, the specific moment when serious becomes critical. The watch was built for this. Maud was built for this. You watch her work, efficient, quiet, with a knowledge that has no formal language and no written source, passed from mother to daughter in exactly these midnight moments. She knows how to position a sick child to help the breathing. She knows the difference between a fever climbing and a fever that's peaked. She knows what she's listening for. She's been here before. The steadiness of her hands says so. You add wood when she gestures. Heat water when the pot cools. Keep yourself out of the way when you're not needed and present when you are. William comes back, slips in through the croft door, takes in the scene in 1 second. Fire, Maud's posture, Ned's breathing, and doesn't say a word. He sets his coat down and sits against the wall where his mother can see him, available if needed. Agnes has a wooden cross in her hand. Edmund talks to Ned, low, murmuring. Whether Ned can hear from inside the fever is unclear. Edmund talks anyway. Things from the day, ordinary things, the way you talk to someone to let them know the world is continuing, that when they come back there will be something to come back to. The night is very long. Around the 3rd hour past midnight, Ned's breathing changes. Maud's hands go still on his chest, a moment that stretches. Then she sits back on her heels and her breath releases. Long, slow, complete. Fever's breaking, she says. The room changes. Not the temperature, and the fire is the same fire. Something else. The particular quality of a space that has been holding a collective breath and can now let it go. Agnes puts her face in her hands. Edmund rests his palm on Ned's hair. You add the last large block of wood to the fire, the one that will last through the rest of the night and into morning. and you sit back against the wall and let the warmth reach your face. Ned wakes at dawn, sweaty, confused, asking for water in the aggrieved tone of someone who's been through something unfair. He'll be sick for another week, but the fever is gone, and the fever was the thing. Maud gives him the horehound tea and sits with him while he drinks it. She looks tired in a specific way, the bone-deep tired of someone who spent the night on guard. But she also looks like someone who was there and did what was needed, and it worked. Ned says with 8-year-old directness, "My chest still hurts." "It's going to hurt for a while," she says. "That's not fair." "No," she says, "it isn't." She gives him more tea. The medieval church knew about the two-sleep system. Of course it did. The church knew about every intimate detail of medieval life in a way that is genuinely difficult to overstate from a secular modern perspective. Your confessor knew things about you that your family didn't know, because confession was not optional, and the church's categories for sin encompass so much of ordinary life that describing your week was implicitly describing your moral situation. The church knew about the watch, and it had opinions. Some positive. The watch was good for prayer. The period between the two sleeps was recommended by religious writers as particularly receptive to spiritual reflection, the mind soft, the defences of the daytime self lowered, the presence of God more readily felt, some watchful in the other sense, because the watch was also when people did things that weren't prayer. The watch appears in court records, not dramatically, but with the steady regularity of something that is simply a feature of the world. This person was found at such an hour in such a place. This event occurred in the middle of the night. This encounter happened between the two sleeps. Not all of these appearances are criminal. Some are simply the footprint of a society living its full life in both halves of the night, with all the complexity that implies. In monasteries, the divine office runs exactly to schedule. Monks rise at midnight, file into the church with candles, say matins, return to their cells, sleep second sleep. Then up again at dawn for lauds. This has been happening in Christian monasteries since the 3rd century. The idea that midnight is a sacred hour for prayer, that the darkest point of the night is when proximity to the divine is sharpest, is nearly as old as monasticism itself. It also happens to coincide with the watch, as if whoever designed the divine office schedule knew, from personal experience or centuries of accumulated observation, that this was the hour when the body woke naturally, and decided, let's give that to God. November arrives, and the cold arrives with it. Not cold as a concept, cold as a physical presence that moves into the longhouse as an additional occupant, one with preferences about sleeping positions and who favours the far wall near the door. Your pallet near the door is, in November, a philosophical commitment. The rushes under you are thicker now. Maud adds fresh rushes each November, a concession to the season that makes the floor less pleasant to look at but considerably warmer to sleep on. Your blanket has been supplemented with a sheepskin that Edmund produced without comment, loaned in a gesture of practical acknowledgement that the coldest sleeping position in the house belongs to the person who can least afford to be incapacitated. The sheepskin smells powerfully of sheep. You have reached an accommodation with this. Sleeping in the cold has its own architecture when you're doing it the way it's done here. You don't fight the cold with a modern approach. The sealed bedroom, the duvet, the temperature-controlled environment, you manage it. The fire banked to last as long as possible. Sleep in your clothes. The informal calculus of who sleeps where, sick, young and old near the fire, able-bodied adults and healthy older children at greater distance. You, as the newest and most able-bodied, occupy the coldest position. This is not a complaint. This is just how it works. November nights during the watch have a different quality than October. The cold that meets you when you sit up is more serious. The distance between the warmth of first sleep and the chill of the room is larger. The disinclination to leave the sheepskin more powerful. You sit up anyway. The fire has dwindled to a smoulder. The breath of the animals on the other side of the partition, visible now as faint vapour in the November air, is the only warmth nearby. The darkness is different in winter. In October, you could sometimes hear birds at the edge of the night, the last blackbird stirring early. In November, nothing. The night is sealed shut. You push the sheepskin aside, reluctantly, with genuine reluctance, with a small internal farewell to the warmth of it, and cross to the hearth. The embers are low but alive. You add wood carefully. Not too much. Wood is wood that was cut and stored, and every block spent in the night is a block not available for morning. You do the calculation in your hands without thinking about it. This much, not more. Back to the pallet. The sheepskin is still warm where you left it. You pull it over yourself and lie in the intersection of warmth and cold. The sheepskin above, November pressing in from everywhere else, and wait for second sleep. Second sleep is different from first sleep. You know this, even without the language for it. First sleep is like falling into a river, fast, the current taking you almost immediately. Second sleep is like easing into something warm by degrees. You're aware of the transition longer, aware of yourself entering it. The dreams in second sleep are different, more vivid, more narrative, the kind where you wake with specific memory of what was happening, not just the feeling of having been somewhere, but the faces, the colours, the sequence of events. You dream during second sleep about your mother's garden, the kitchen croft behind your family's house, where leeks grow in summer and cabbages in autumn. There's a rosemary bush that's been there longer than anyone can remember, thick and grey at the base, surprisingly green at the tips year-round. You dream about the smell of it, which is rosemary, but also more than that. The smell of home in the specific sense of the smell that will, for the rest of your life, mean safe. You wake at dawn with that smell still present, and the frost on the inside of the gap at the bottom of the door, and the distant bell of the church calling lauds, and the animals beginning their morning complaints. The rosemary smell fades. The cold doesn't. Another day. Winter nights are the longest. This is both obvious and, when you're living it, remarkable in its completeness. In December, night in 1313, England runs from roughly 3:30 in the afternoon to past 8 in the morning. 17 hours of darkness. 17 hours during which the fire is the only light, the outside world inaccessible, the entire household contained within the walls of the longhouse. First sleep in December might begin at 4 in the afternoon. This sounds absurd. Going to bed before the modern workday ends? But in December 1313 there is nothing to do at 4 in the afternoon. The fields are frozen. The light is gone. Candles are too expensive for hours of social activity. What is there to do in complete darkness except sleep? First sleep runs until perhaps 10 or 11 at night. The watch falls then. You're awake in the middle of the night, but the middle of the night by any clock is only 10 in the evening. Second sleep runs from 11 until dawn at 8. 2 sleeps plus a watch still totals roughly the same number of hours. The watch in December is longer, more night to fill. People talk more, pray more, do the things that summer nights only allow briefly. And summer is the other extreme, nights so short that first sleep and second sleep are barely separated. In June, you might wake between the 2 sleeps at midnight and look up through the Louvre and see the sky already lightening in the northeast. Summer nights are less frightening. The cold is not an adversary. The darkness is brief enough to feel manageable. The watch falls in genuine midnight, and there's something almost pleasant about sitting in a warm room with the fire down to embers and the door cracked slightly and the smell of summer coming in. Grass and mud and the faint sweetness of bean flowers in the croft. But summer brings its own concerns. The ale goes off faster in warmth. The meat in the cool larder needs checking more urgently. The flies come through the gaps in the wattle, and the rushes need changing because the warmth accelerates what happens to them. There is no season in medieval England that is not also an adversary. You've been in Thornfield long enough now, winter and into spring, to understand the village's night ecology, not just your household's patterns, but the larger patterns of all the households existing simultaneously in the dark. The Godfrey family at the bottom of the lane, their baby wakes at specific times, and you've learned the pattern of the crying from where you lie. First cry sometime around the end of first sleep. That's feeding time. Second cry closer to dawn. Between them a silence that means the baby and the mother have both, blessedly, slept. The Benfield house, 2 doors up, old Thomas Benfield, who is in his 60s and has the chest complaint that many people his age carry in winter, a crackling, difficult breathing that worsens in the cold and is audible on still nights through the wattle walls. His wife Rose gets up during the watch and tends to him. You've heard her sometimes through the walls, quietly. The sound of water being heated, the low murmur of voices. Thomas Benfield is alive in spring. He makes it through the winter. His wife's vigilance during the watch is part of why. The baker near the church, his oven starts at 3 in the morning, and the smell of bread reaches you sometimes in second sleep, woven into the edge of dreams. A smell so good it can wake you briefly with the sense that something good is about to happen. You remember it's 3 in the morning, the bread isn't yours, and you go back to sleep. But you wake knowing the smell is there, knowing that somewhere in the village light is on and fire is burning and life is continuing, that this is ordinary. Ordinary is underrated. Ordinary is everything. Geoffrey is the night watch this year, 40 years old, broad-shouldered, carrying a lantern and a stave, making his rounds from the end of the first watch bell until dawn. You've seen his lantern light through the gap under the door, a warm circle of moving orange against the dark lane floor, then gone. He never stops at the Atfield house, nothing to stop for. But he stops at the Godfrey house sometimes when the crying goes on too long in the wrong way. Just a knock, a voice. Everything well in there? And John Godfrey's voice, exhausted. Yes, Geoffrey. Thank you. And the light moving on. This is the village managing its night. Each household in its own darkness, connected to all the others by invisible threads of sound and smell and proximity. Each household monitored by the slow circuit of Geoffrey's lantern. It's not a phone call. It's a 40-year-old man with a stick walking in the cold, It's also, most nights, exactly enough. March. You've been in Thornfield for 5 months. The ground is soft again. The birds are back. You hear them now in second sleep, which falls closer and closer to dawn as the days lengthen. And sometimes you wake from second sleep to the blackbird, and you lie in the half-light of early morning with the sound of it coming through the thatch, and you think, this is not a bad thing being here. It isn't what you planned. You planned 6 months, then move on. The loose plan that 19-year-olds make, more a direction than a destination. But 5 months of watching a household from the inside changes your relationship with it in ways that are hard to describe and impossible to undo. You know this house. You know the specific sound of the door when the wood has swelled in winter damp. You know the way the second goat, the anxious one, whom you've privately named Agnes, which would go over badly if Agnes Atfield ever found out, bleats at 2 a.m. when something in the lane disturbs her. You know which way the smoke goes when the wind shifts and the louvre needs adjusting before anyone else notices. You know the sound of Maud's footstep during the watch. You know the difference between the footstep that means she's checking the fire and the footstep that means she's checking a child. You know what Edmund's breathing sounds like when he's lying awake worrying about the rent due at Lady Day. It's barely different from ordinary sleep, but different enough. This is what 5 months of sleeping in the same room as people does to you. You learn the language of their nighttime selves, the unconscious grammar of their fears and habits. You know them in a way that is specific to darkness and proximity and shared vulnerability. You don't have a word for this, but it's something. Spring nights during the watch are the most alive. October and November have a hushed vigilance, a watch held against the cold. Spring has something different. There's something in the air that comes through the wattle walls, the smell of turned earth and new grass, and the watch in spring feels less like guarding against danger and more like possibility. It feels like possibility. You lie in the watch on a March night, and the brook is running fast with snowmelt, and the blackbird has decided 3 a.m. is perfectly reasonable for practice, and the goats are restless with the season, and the world outside the wall is doing something complicated and alive. The conversations during the watch have had a different quality the past 2 weeks. Edmund's voice, when it speaks to William in the night, carries a new cadence, not arguments, but a weight. Cecily Miller is expecting. The situation that William was building during his midnight excursions has produced the situation it was going to produce, and now it needs to be addressed in the formal way. William has not pretended otherwise. Edmund has not pretended to be less troubled than he is. And Maud has apparently been prepared for some time. Her input during these night conversations is practical and unsurprised. This is also what the watch is for. The business that can't be conducted at the dinner table with children present, that can't be conducted in the fields where anyone might hear. The things that need the middle of the night permission, where defences are lower and truth is more accessible. William is getting married. He'll have his own household by autumn, his own fire to bank at night, his own position near the cold side of the room, because the cold side of the room is always where the youngest and most capable sleep. That's always going to be the truth. June, 8 months now. You're no longer new in any meaningful sense. You know things that William used to be the one who knew, and sometimes Maud directs instructions to you in a way that has stopped registering you as temporary. The night of the summer solstice. Not a formal holiday, but it has its own character. The longest day, and therefore the shortest night. First sleep falls at 9. The light is only just fading. There's still colour in the western sky when the fire is banked and the household lies down. The light comes in around the edges of the oiled cloth window stop, and for the first time in months you can see the shapes in the room without fire, the outline of the posts, the hanging shapes of herb bundles above the partition, the dimmer darkness that is the far wall. First sleep is shallow in June. The light isn't fully dark. The blackbirds don't stop until late. The warmth built up in the thatch through the long hot day radiates down through the night, and sleeping when it's warm after a winter and spring of cold is both pleasant and disorienting. Your body has recalibrated for the cold, and the warmth feels like a change of state rather than a comfort. The watch falls at midnight, or what would be midnight. The bells, St. Mary's, distant but audible on a still night, mark the hours. You wake at what sounds like the watch, and the sky through the Louvre is not fully dark. In the northeast, a faint luminosity, not dawn yet, but the ghost of the longest day refusing to fully leave. The air coming in around the door is warm and smells of hay from the field, and something floral you can't identify, but that has characterized every warm night this week. Everyone is awake during this watch. Ned is lying on his back, talking quietly. He's listing the animals he's seen since May in a kind of private inventory that seems important to him. A hare in the long field, a deer at the edge of the wood, 2 red kites over the south field that made Edmund look up and shade his eyes. Red kites can take a piglet if they're determined. Edmund listens. He's been listening to Ned differently since November, with an attention that has something protective in it. Something that wasn't quite there before the fever night. Agnes is in her state of contained restlessness. The correspondence with the religious house 5 miles east has been ongoing. Edmund knows. He doesn't say anything about it. Maud knows and is keeping specific counsel on her opinions. Agnes is 16 and knows what she wants, which is more than most people ever manage. You sit during the June watch and think, I'm still here. Not with surprise exactly, but with the recognition that you stayed past the point where it was still temporary. You stayed through a winter and through a fever and into the long light of June, and you know where the loose board is, and you know which goat is anxious, and you can read the smoke from the chimney hole and tell whether the wind has shifted before you look outside. You stayed. The village is quiet outside. Even the dogs are subdued in the warmth. The brook is low, June drought settling into the fields. A thin sound barely audible. The night smells like summer, like the fullness of a year that has kept most of its promises. Not prosperity, not by the standards of the manor house or the merchant in town, but enough. Edmund's word, which Maud uses too. Enough. It's enough. The watch is an hour tonight. Shorter than winter. The light in the northeast is already strengthening barely when you lie back down. Second sleep arrives quickly, softly, warmly. You dream about the rosemary garden again. But this time there are other things in the dream too. The sound of Ned's voice listing animals, the smell of the Atfield hearth, the specific cold of the November door against your shoulder. Things that are home. Before we drift towards sleep, let's go deeper for a moment. Deeper in time. The 2-sleep pattern didn't begin in medieval England. It's not a medieval phenomenon. It's documented in classical antiquity. Livy, writing in the 1st century BCE, mentions the interval between the 2 sleeps. Homer's Odyssey contains references to what happens after first sleep. The Greek physician Galen, in the 2nd century CE, advises that the watch is optimal for digestion and productive thought. Go further back. Anthropological evidence suggests that segmented sleep, 2 phases separated by a period of wakefulness, is the default human sleep pattern when artificial light is removed. Studies conducted with volunteers living under natural light conditions for several weeks show a consistent convergence. The body, given darkness and no electric stimulus, reorganizes itself around this same 2-phase structure, the same watch. It happens naturally, without instruction, without precedent in the participants' modern lives. The body remembers. Go further back still, past the agricultural revolution, past settlements and longhouses and villages, small groups in shelters or caves, on the African savannah, in the forests of early Europe. A group that all slept simultaneously through the night was a group without a watch. A group without a watch was a group with no one monitoring for fire, for predators, for the member of the group whose fever was rising in the dark. The watch, in evolutionary terms, wasn't an accident. It was a feature. The medieval household that woke at midnight and checked the embers and listened to the sounds of the world around it was doing what its ancestors did in different shelters under different skies for 100,000 years before that. Maud, crouching in the firelight with her hand on Ned's forehead, was the culmination of 100,000 years of someone waking in the night to check. The watch kept people alive. The watch is why we're here. You're still here. This surprises you slightly. You intended 6 months. You've been here 13. Edmund offered a permanent position in the spring. Not dramatic, not formal, just, you could stay if you wanted to. The way permanent things often start, with understatement and a sideways look, and the assumption that what matters is understood without being said. You said yes. The way you say yes to things that have already happened and are just being made official. William left in summer, married Cecily, took a small tenement at the south edge of the village. The attic pallet is occupied now by a new boy, 14 years old, called Jack, from a village 2 miles west. He's extremely thin and jumps at every noise and looks at the longhouse the way you looked at it 13 months ago, with the slightly dazed expression of someone whose category system is being revised by reality. You've told him about the fire, about the goats, about the gap under the door being cold but less cold since you stuffed additional rags into it, about the gap between first sleep and second sleep, and what to do during the watch. He listened with the expression of someone who is receiving information while simultaneously having feelings about the life choices that led to receiving it. You recognize the expression. You wore it once. Autumn again. October again. The specific October quality of light draining from the day faster than seems fair, the ground hardening, the nights returning to their long, serious darkness. You bank the fire at night, check the embers during the watch, know the sounds of this household the way you know your own hands, which is awake, which isn't, whether Ned's breathing is normal, whether the second goat's anxiety has a cause worth investigating. You carry this knowledge in the specific way you carry knowledge of a place you've lived long enough to understand. Not as information you look up, but as something you hold in your body. Tonight during the watch, it's you and Joan. Joan is somehow still here, stubbornly, inexplicably. She sleeps more now, sometimes through the whole watch, which Maud says is a sign of something but doesn't specify. But tonight she's awake, cross in hand, and you can see her face by the dim glow of the banked fire. An old face, every line of it, a record. You're still here, she says. Still here, you say. She considers this. My husband said that, she says, after the first year. You're still here. A sound, something close to a laugh. He meant it as a compliment. He was not a man who gave compliments easily. Did it feel like one? It felt like truth, she says, which is better. The night is quiet. Jack is breathing the deep, even breathing of a child who has run out of anxiety for the day. Ned sleeps through the watch now. He's 9. He's past the age when his body does the full waking. Maud and Edmund are murmuring as always, the low sound of a shared life that has been going on long enough to have its own private language. You'll leave eventually, Joan says. Probably. Everyone does. She adjusts the cross. Or they die here, which is the same thing. She says this without particular sadness, just geography, the truth of where things end up. But you've learned what you needed to, she says. You're not sure what you've learned exactly. Nothing that goes on a list. Nothing with a name. You've learned to bank a fire. To tell a sick sound from a sleeping sound. To navigate a room full of people in complete darkness without waking them. To wake at midnight and do what's needed and lie back down and trust the second sleep to come. To be awake when being awake matters. These are not small things. In a world where every winter is a test and every fever is a possibility, and every fire left unattended can be the last fire, they're the things that distinguish the household that makes it from the household that doesn't. Yes, you say to Joan. I think I have. She nods. Her eyes close. Here's what Roger Rickert found when he started pulling the evidence together in the 1990s, working through 500 years of accumulated documents and looking for the pattern. The watch was universal, not just in England, not just in Europe, not just in the medieval period. The references span centuries and continents, colonial America, ancient Rome, the Pacific Islands, sub-Saharan Africa. Wherever people lived without electric light, the 2-sleep pattern appeared. The watch, the middle waking, the hour between the 2 sleeps. It was human, not cultural. It was the default, not the exception. When Rickert presented his findings, some doctors were sceptical. And then, gradually, they recognised what their patients had been describing for years. The middle-of-the-night wakefulness that felt natural. That felt like something the body was doing rather than something the body had failed to prevent. They had been treating normal as pathology. The Industrial Revolution ended the 2-sleep system not with force but with light. Gaslighting extended the productive evening. Factory schedules imposed a single sleep block. By the late 1800s, the watch had been compressed out of existence by the simple fact that there were now better things to do at 10 at night than go to sleep. And with it went something else, something that didn't have a name but that the medical text had been circling for centuries. The specific quality of the midnight hour, the softness of the mind between the 2 sleeps, the particular kind of thought that only happens when the day's defences have come down and the body is rested enough to be honest. The watch was when people talked about things they couldn't talk about otherwise. When Maud heard Ned's breathing change. When Edmund and William negotiated quietly in the dark, a future neither of them could fully see. When Joan told a boy from somewhere else that his voice was quiet enough for the night. All of that went into the night and didn't come back. What came back instead was insomnia, 3 a.m. anxiety, the terrible alertness of someone who is awake when they should not be, in a culture that has no framework for it, in a room designed for unconsciousness. The watch, orphaned from its context, became a disorder. There's a monastery 3 miles south of Thornfield. You've seen it twice. both times from a distance. The square tower of the church rising above the tree line, the pale stone catching whatever light was available. It looks permanent in a way that the longhouse doesn't, as though it was placed there deliberately by something with a longer view of history than people usually have. The monks at St. Cuthbert's Priory follow the divine office. 8 canonical hours, 8 prayer services distributed across the 24 hours of each day, beginning with vigils, which some call matins, in the middle of the night. Vigils is the midnight office. It falls, depending on the season, somewhere between midnight and 3 in the morning. The community rises from first sleep, files in silence from the daughter, the communal sleeping hall, along the night stair directly into the south transept of the church, and prays. In November, this means rising in complete darkness into air cold enough to see your breath, filing down stone stairs worn smooth by a century of bare feet, entering a church that is all shadow and the smell of old incense and tallow smoke. They pray for roughly 45 minutes. Then they return to the daughter and sleep, second sleep until Lord's at dawn. This has been happening at St. Cuthbert's since it was founded in 1174, 139 years, every night, no exceptions. The rule of St. Benedict, which governs Benedictine monasteries, and most monasteries in medieval England are Benedictine or Benedictine influenced, is explicit about this. Vigils, every night, in the dark, in the cold. Why midnight? Because midnight is when it should happen. Because the dark is when God is most present. Because the hours between first and second sleep are the hours when the ordinary defences of the waking mind are lowered and something more honest can be reached. Or, from a more secular perspective, because someone at the origin of Christian monasticism in the 3rd or 4th century noticed that the body wakes naturally at this hour and thought, let's give that waking to God. Both things can be true at once. Father Anselm, the prior of St. Cuthbert's, has a reputation in the village. Not a dramatic reputation, just the accumulated impression of a man who has kept the midnight office for 30 years, who wakes every night at the same hour, who has built his entire sense of self around the rhythm of sleeping and waking and praying and sleeping again. When he came to the village last spring to discuss the tithes with Edmund and 2 other yardlanders, you were there in the background, carrying things, doing the invisible work of someone not important enough to sit at the table. He was older than you expected, thin, in the specific way of men who have spent decades eating the modest diet the rule prescribes. But his eyes were alert in a way that suggested someone who spends regular time in the watch, that quality of seeing that comes from having practiced being present in the dark. He sat with Edmund and talked about grain measurements, practical things. The monastery is a landowner like any other landowner, concerned with yield and storage and whether the eastern field will need resting next year. But when Edmund's youngest cat walked across the table and the prior automatically moved the inkwell out of its path, a gesture of unhurried competence, no alarm, just adjustment, you thought, a man who has woken at midnight for 30 years and used the hour to be present in the dark moves differently than other men. He left before supper, walking, no horse, no litter. 3 miles back to the monastery in the early afternoon light, upright and unhurried, and you watched him until the lane bent and he was gone. Edmund came back inside and said, "A fair man for a prior." Maud said, "He moves quietly," which was exactly what you were thinking. March, the year of your permanent position. The thing about fire is that it doesn't announce itself. The fires that end badly aren't the ones that roar and crackle and give warning. Those fires you can fight. The ones that end badly are the ones that start small in an ash cover or in a thatch corner and smoulder, patient, present, committed, while the household sleeps. The smell reaches you at the edge of first sleep, not smoke from the banked hearth, different, specific. The smell of dry straw beginning to think about heat. You're awake before you understand why. Your hand on the floor, the reflex you didn't know you developed until you found it working. Palm flat, feeling for warmth in the packed earth. It's there, not the ordinary warmth of a well-banked fire. Something from the wrong direction, the partition, the animal's half. You move before you think, not running, fast and careful, the way you move in the dark, counting paces by memory. 4 paces to the hearth, 2 left, the edge of the partition, and there, in the angle where the wall meets the partition, a smell like nothing else. Dry straw releasing its stored summer into heat. A nail, you found out later. An iron nail in the partition beam, corroded and loose, that had been gradually working itself free, that fell sometime during the evening and landed against the straw of the floor, hot enough from the fire's radiation to begin the long, slow process of smouldering. In another hour it would have found the partition itself. In 2 hours the thatch would have had it. You get Edmund awake with 2 words, quiet and specific, and he's at the bucket before you finish saying them, because Edmund Atfield, 46 years old, has been in this house for 20 years, and has been having this fear every night for 20 years, and his body knows the protocol the way your hands know the fire. Water on the smoulder. The specific hiss and smell of heat removed by water, then more water, then hands in the straw, finding the nail, finding the extent of the damage. It wasn't far, it had just started. It was a situation that would have been a catastrophe, and instead was a bucket of cold water at 2 a.m. Maud stood with the children at the door. The routine for this, which apparently exists, which Maud has apparently had a version of prepared, and when Edmund held up the nail in the firelight and said, "Found it," the specific sound she made was not relief and not anger, and was somehow both at once. You sat on the hearthstone for a while after that. Your hands were shaken slightly, not from exertion, from the gap between what it almost was and what it was. Edmund sat across from you and looked at the nail in his hand. "I need to check every nail in that partition," he said. "I'll do it in the morning." "Yes," he set the nail down. "You should." A long pause. The fire had been stirred back up. More warmth than strictly necessary, both of you needing the light. "You were awake," he said. "I smelled it." "So did I," he said. "But you were already up." He wasn't looking at you. Looking at the partition, at the place where the water had darkened the straw. "Good nose," he said finally. This was Edmund Atfield's version of, "I'm glad you're here. You've lived in this house long enough to translate. You check the nails in the morning. Found 3 more loose. Replace them with proper wooden pegs where possible." Told Maud, who nodded in the way that meant she'd already noted the problem and was glad it had been addressed. The house stood. Houses that stood were houses where someone was awake. Summer, your 2nd year. Ned is 10 now, and 10 has given him a different quality of questions than 8 had. It's during the watch, a July watch, short, warm, the smell of hay through the wattle walls. You're both awake, which happens more often in summer. Ned's body has started doing the proper watch thing in the last few months. He wakes, he's present, He has questions. Tonight's question: why don't we sleep all at once? You're quiet for a moment, not because you don't know, because you're figuring out how to say it. We do, you say. We just do it in 2 parts. Why 2? The fire is almost out, just orange at the centre. Ned is a dark shape across the room, sitting up the way he does. Think about the fire, you say. A pause. If we all slept at once, all night, one long sleep, who checks it? Oh, says Ned, and the animals, and whether someone's sick, and whether the smell of the air has changed. So we take turns, sort of, except everyone wakes at the same time, so it's not exactly turns. You think about this. It's more like the night is long and there's work in the middle of it, and our bodies know. Ned considers this with the focused seriousness of a 10-year-old processing new information. Joan says the angels watch in the night, he says. Maybe they do. Do you believe that? I think, you say carefully, that someone is always watching. Whether it's angels or just the household, someone's always awake. And that's the same thing in some ways. Ned lies back down. Then, Thomas. Yes. When you go away, when you leave, will someone else check the fire? You stay quiet for a moment. Your father will, you say. Your father's been checking fire since before I was born. I just helped. Oh. A long pause. Okay. The sound of a 10-year-old settling into second sleep, the specific softening of breath, the shift from restless to present to gone, arrives within minutes. You sit with the warm dark a while longer. The question stays with you. Not the fire question. That one you answered. The other one, the one underneath it, when you go away. Medieval English has specific language for the 2-sleep system that modern English has lost. First sleep and second sleep. In documents of the period, these appear as common phrases, unremarkable, the way we say morning and evening, assumed knowledge, no explanation needed. The dorveil, borrowed from French, used in English texts in the ecclesiastical context particularly. From door, sleep and veil, wakefulness, the blend state, the threshold between, the hour when you are neither properly asleep nor properly awake, but occupying the edge of both. The watch, the most common English term. It carries the functional implication. To watch is to be alert, to be on guard. The watch was the alert hour, the guarding hour. And then there are the phrases built around activities, lying awake in the night, different from simply being awake in the middle of the night. It implies the purposeful state, the night's talking, the specific conversations held during the watch. Night work, which had both innocent and less innocent implications depending on context. What's fascinating is how completely this language disappeared. Not gradually, fairly abruptly in the late 1800s and early 1900s, as the single consolidated sleep became the norm. Within 50 years of electric lighting becoming widespread, the 2-sleep vocabulary had been entirely retired from common use. Not because the underlying experience disappeared, the biology stayed exactly the same. People still woke at midnight, still lay awake in the threshold state, still had the specific alertness of the watch. They just no longer had words for it that explained it as normal, so they described it as abnormal, as insomnia, as anxiety, as something that needed addressing. When Kircher's research began to circulate in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the reaction from people who suffered from middle-of-the-night wakefulness was, consistently, in interviews and in clinical settings, relief. Not surprise exactly, just relief. Oh, they said, it's not wrong. It's just what the body does. The word for what they were feeling, the specific comfort of having a normal name for something that felt abnormal, doesn't exist in modern English either. It did once, probably. Before we lost the language of the night your last night in Thornfield. You've been here nearly 2 years. The decision to leave was not dramatic. A cousin, far north, with land that needs working, and an offer of better terms than Edmund can match. The logic was sound. Edmund accepted it the way Edmund accepted things that were sound, with a nod, an absence of argument, and a look at Maud that said we knew this was coming. The night before you leave, you bank the fire with particular attention. The motion has become fully automatic. The position of your hands in the ash, the angle of the wood laid against the coals, the specific weight of knowing how much heat this will hold through until morning. You've done this almost 700 times, each time the same motion, slightly different weight. The autumn fire that runs warm, the January fire that needs coaxing, the spring fire that barely needs help. The summer fire that is mostly gesture. A few embers more for continuity than heat. 700 fires banked. 700 midnights risen into. 700 watches kept in this room, in this dark with these people. This is the last one. You sit by the hearthstone longer than usual. Not from sentiment exactly, from the specific attention you pay to things that are ending. Edmund and Maud are awake. You can hear it in their breathing. They don't speak during this watch. Not their voices, not even the murmur. Just present, in the way they've always been present. Ned is asleep, properly asleep, the way he sleeps now at 10, through the whole watch more often than not. You've watched this happen. The gradual shift from a child who woke and needed the watch, to be navigated for him to someone whose body is starting to calibrate itself toward adult rhythms. In a few years he'll wake and be the one checking the fire. Young Jack on the pallet you started on. He's been here 4 months now. He sleeps through most of the watch still. The new sleep, deep and uncomplicated. The sleep of someone who's been working since before dawn and whose body has no margin for nighttime alertness yet. He'll get there. Joan is awake. You know this without looking. The quality of her corner has changed from first sleep to watch to second sleep, the same way it has every night for 2 years, a signature as distinctive as a face. Tomorrow, she says, not a question. Tomorrow. The fire, your hands near it, the warmth that is not yours but that you've tended long enough to know. You know how to bank a fire, she says. I do. You know what to listen for. I do. She's quiet. My husband was a man who could walk into any room and know what needed doing, she says. I haven't seen that in many people. You're becoming it. You don't say anything. The fire first, she says. Always the fire first. Everything else can wait a minute, but always check the fire. Yes. She settles back into her corner, the cross against her collarbone, the breathing that is prayer or sleep or the threshold between. Safe road, she says. Thank you, Joan. She doesn't answer. She's already somewhere else. The doorway, the threshold, the place between. You lie back on the pallet. The watch is ending. You can feel it. The way you've learned to feel it over almost 700 nights. The body's quality of wakefulness beginning to soften. The alertness that characterized the first part of the watch settling into something easier. The second sleep. Coming. The sounds of the house. Edmund's breathing changing to the depth of sleep. Maud quieter. Always quieter, but the same. Ned's steady exhale, untroubled. Young. Jack's deeper rhythm across the room, a child really, sleeping the way children sleep when they've been given enough to eat. The brook at the bottom of the Westfield, May full, running over its stone bed in the dark. An owl in the elms, the same owl or a descendant of the same owl, or just the permanent fact of an owl in the elms at Thornfield in every season of every year. The fire breathing in its ash cover, alive, tended, holding through the night until morning, all of it yours, all of it tomorrow, not yours. Here's what you'll carry, the specific weight of the hearthstone under your palms at midnight, the way the ember finds your hand before you can see it, the 3 paces from the pallet to the fire in complete darkness, exact, memorized, the sound of Maud's footstep when it has purpose behind it, the smell of the watch, the specific smell of the longhouse at midnight, which is animals and banked fire and dried herbs and old rushes and wool, and the particular combination of 6 people's nighttime breathing, a smell that is nowhere else and can never be reconstructed. And that is, without question or sentimentality, the smell of safety. Joan's voice in the dark saying, "Your voice is quiet enough for the night." Ned, 10 years old, asking, "Why 2 sleeps?" And the answer settling into you as you gave it. Because the night is long, and there is work in the middle of it, and our bodies know. The fever night. Maud's hands steady in the firelight. The nail. The smell. The 2 words that woke Edmund and the water that ended it. 690-something banked fires. Second sleep arrives, the way it always arrives, soft, unhurried, warmer than the room around it. The dreams in second sleep are REM-rich, story-full, more honest than daylight. You don't know this language, but you know the territory. Tonight you dream about being small, walking in the fields north of your mother's house, the ones with the stone boundary that predated anyone's memory of them. Ancient stones, grey and unhurried, the long grass between, the sky doing something complicated with clouds, and someone behind you, not following, accompanying. You can't see them in the dream, but you know them. The world in the dream is safe. Tomorrow you'll walk north, but that's tomorrow. Right now, in this room, in this house, in this October night that is simultaneously 1314, and every October night that has preceded it back to the first human being who woke in the dark and checked whether the fire was still alive. Right now everything is quiet. The watch is over. The world is breathing. Let your thoughts follow. Let the sounds become background. Let the night have what's left of it. You've kept the watch. You've earned this. Sleep now. Sleep. Good night.